News cycles are out. Shock cycles are in. That is what we're experiencing day in, day out. Another shock, another scandal, another period of outrage, and then the same thing all over again. One day, President Trump decides he's going to award himself a rich government contract. His acting chief of staff comes out and tells the press why it's a great idea. And then Trump suddenly reverses himself and blames the media for making it an issue. Shock on top of shock on top of shock. Now, Trump's been promoting debunked conspiracy theories this week. He's been calling the legal impeachment process a coup. Remember that letter he sent to the Turkish president that came out this week? It seemed so informal, some reporters thought it was a hoax. These aren't news cycles, not really. These are shock cycles. One set of talking heads says they're stunned, horrified, bewildered. Then another set of talking heads says the rest of us are taking it all too seriously. There's shock about the shock, and then there's shock about the shock about the shock, and then Trump delivers another shock. He calls Nancy Pelosi crazy, or he accuses her of hating America. Or Mick Mulvaney holds a presser and confirms a quid pro quo, then says get over it, then says that's not what he said. Boom, boom, boom. He's getting basic facts wrong about American forces in harm's way. He's calling James Mattis the world's most overrated general. And his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is under federal investigation with new details every day. Shock, shock, shock. The challenge, I think, for all of us is to break out of these shock cycles and make sure the news is still front and center. Yes, as citizens, we have to retain our capacity to be shocked. But more importantly, we have to recognize why these stories are stunning. And that's where journalists come in. That's why the news cycle is still essential. A lot of folks these days just hear the shock and outrage, and they miss the why. They miss the unconstitutionality of what's going on. They miss the context. They come away thinking it's just a partisan food fight. But so much of this is nonpartisan. It's constitutional. The big story continues to be abuse of power. And aides like Mick Mulvaney, they're left just to complain about the press.
You were asked by Jonathan Karl, you've described a quid pro quo, and you said that happens all the time.
And reporters will use their language all the time. So my language never said quid pro quo. But let's get to the heart of the matter. Go back and look at that list of 3 things. What was I talking about? Things that it was legitimate for the president to do.
Once again, the White House telling us not to believe what we see and what we hear. That's been the through line for the past few years, but it doesn't mean it's not shocking. It is still shocking. Let me bring in my panel here in Washington. Matt Lewis is a Daily Beast senior columnist and CNN political commentator. Olivia Nuzzi is New York Magazine's Washington correspondent. Crystal Ball is the co-host of Hill TV's Rising. And Katie Rogers is the New York Times White House correspondent who had to write the story late last night about the Doral reversal. Katie, what do you think happened?
Well, I think the president had been dribbling this idea out for months and months and months, saying this is the perfect piece of property. He got a lot of free media for it. And then when he had Mick Mulvaney come out and finally say this is what we're going to do, I really don't think they anticipated the amount of backlash that would come from Democrats, but also Republicans. Lisa Murkowski of Alaska was very tepid, but said, no, this is not appropriate when asked. Congressman Rooney of Florida said this is not the kind of thing presidents should be doing. So the White House had to backtrack based on, it was actually a little bit of a crack in this Republican wall of never criticizing the president.
Even the New York Post, which I don't think we can overstate how important the New York Post is to
Murdoch property,
Trump.
one of the president's favorite papers.
Something he reads frequently. I'm sure that he actually reads the content of the New York Post more than he reads the content of the papers that he's criticizing frequently. And I think it was really important that the editorial board of the New York Post even came out and said that he should change the property.
Matt, you say this is a 3-part process. You tweeted out the 3 parts. Part 1 is Trump proposes something crazy or sketchy or stupid. And then what's part 2?
Part 2 is Republicans rush to defend it, and Republicans and Donald Trump apologists. I mean, there was a piece I saw this week about why this was brilliant. This puts Donald Trump at home court advantage, and we should all support it. And then step 3, of course, is Donald Trump sort of pulling the rug out from under his own defender.
And reversing. So 2 things happened here. A lot of support for it among Republicans who look like fools now. But at the same time, there were some cracks in the usual defense. There was some dissent from Republicans about this Doral move.
And the issue is so easy for people to understand, I think, too, that even voters who might be locked in Republicans still understand that this is the president's family business that would stand to benefit. If not financially, the White House, stressed that there wouldn't be any profit. That is free media. That is people coming from all over the world. It's earned media. The president has bragged about being a master of this at length before. This is what the Trump organization stood to gain.
So, Crystal, I always say the Trump White House should have more press conferences. They should have more press briefings.
Right.
Then Mick Mulvaney holds a press briefing. It's a disaster. He has to walk back key statements. Am I a hypocrite for them saying it's a disaster, or should we be able to have both frequent press briefings and accurate information at the briefings?
Yeah, I mean, that would be ideal for sure. And I mean, I loved your monologue. I think the drawl thing, it was like just a shade too shameless though. But I love your monologue because I think it takes a bigger look at what's going on. I mean, this is not a news cycle of shock, outrage, shock, outrage, shock, outrage. And in fact, Trump has totally gamed that system. I mean, that's a big part of why he's in the White House to start with. And as long as we keep covering it in this same way of being so shocked and then outraged and so shocked and then outraged, he's going to continue to game that whole thing. Look,
and then exhausted, shocked, outraged, and then exhausted.
Yeah, and look, here's the reality. I think we all know Trump is a symptom of a larger problem. And yet, rather than covering that larger problem or even covering the other symptoms, we just cover Trump like he is the center of the problem. You have a massive working class movement rising up in this country and rising up around the world. That's what's really going on. So when we fixate on did he call Nancy Pelosi third rate or third grade, et cetera, we miss those underlying currents that are really driving all of what's happening here in this country.
What about Mulvaney having a press conference at all? Do you wonder, I don't normally buy into the idea that he's trying to distract, from Gordon Sondland's testimony or something. But in this case, given that he has completely reversed himself about Doral, part of me does wonder if there was an element of change the story, change the shock. Anybody think so?
I would say the Syria thing is actually the worst thing going on for Trump right now. I mean, it's just, you have military veterans who are saying this is completely unacceptable. You have essentially a genocide unfolding that, our president greenlit. So that's a real problem. But again, zooming out, you have 70% of Americans who say they are furious at the political establishment. You have 40% who say they want to burn it all down. And so when they see us pulling our hair out, when they see Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, et cetera, freaking out, they don't mind that. The details of the story get glossed over. They like to see the elite institutions breaking down and freaking out. They love that.
I was just going to say, I think, Donald Trump very well may be trying to distract and following up one chaotic thing with one chaotic thing. And I think actually you have a point. It does work. It's catnip for the press. I think it gets the American public off balance. We don't know what to believe. And eventually it normalizes things. But the one catch to that is, I think, and you mentioned the exhaustion, I think Republican politicians are finally becoming thoroughly exhausted with defending this president day in and day out, and it means defending the indefensible. And we saw them step out in the case of Syria. Mitch McConnell has an op-ed in the Washington Post, condemning what Donald Trump did there. I think we're starting to see Republicans move away from this president.
And Olivia, you wrote about that this week in New York Magazine, some of the exhaustion. Republican aides as well.
I think the way that the media or liberals have Trump fatigue, that exists on the right as well. It's just different because they're not outraged. They're not trying to get rid of him. They're not trying to actively do anything to change the situation. But they also feel a kind of fatigue. They feel sick of what he's doing. They can't be shocked by anything anymore because I think they've lost
mentality.
Yeah,
Marco Rubio's
Trench mentality.
Marco Rubio's body
It's in
language
the White House like that too.
is utterly defeated.
But I did want to say, I don't think it's fair to say that it's, we get distracted by the outrage cycle and that's not quite important. I think that what the president says is obviously news, no matter where he says it. If he says it to the press waiting for Air Force One or the Marine One, if he says it on Twitter, it's always news. And I think we have to treat it as such. We have to treat it as important. Even if he is trying to say, hey, look over there.
Even if it's
news.
nonsense.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair, Olivia. Of course, what the leader of the free world says is newsworthy, of course. But it crowds out everything else. And so when we fixate, impeachment's a great example, right? I can't stand this president. I can't stand him. I think he's terrible for the country. I think he's terrible for the world. But I think it's very telling what the media and the elite institutions decide is a step too far. It's when another elite, Joe Biden, is threatened. It's when the military-industrial complex's right to send Javelin missiles to Ukraine is threatened. That's a bad thing. I'm not excusing any of this, right? It was not okay that Trump did this, but he's caused real harm to real people, and that doesn't seem to get the same outrage as when he's quote unquote breaking the norms and guardrails of democracy.
Except when I was driving down the
people sent
highway
him
the
there
other
to
day
do.
and there's banners saying stop family separation. There are many people out there in the
course.
country taking action on many
I don't
issues.
think people- I
Matt,
don't
let me
think-
just ask you
But
about
did
it.
we impeach him for that? No.
Well, Matt, so you've been a Republican who's spoken out in favor of impeachment. I just wonder what it's been like for you the past few weeks.
Oh, it's been great. The water's warm. Come on in, everybody. Look, it's easy for me because I don't have to change. I don't have to defend the indefensible. I thought the Kurds were our allies before. I don't suddenly think that they're worse than ISIS. I thought General Mattis was a hero and a tough-as-nails Marine general before. I don't have to suddenly think that he's an overrated general. I get to just be consistent.
Does that mean
I
you're
thought
not
it
a
was-
real Republican? Because your headline for the
Well-
Daily Beast, this column says, this is the BS you have to believe to be a
Yeah.
Republican in
Was it-
2019. You have to
was it
believe that
Ronald
Mattis
Reagan
is the
said,
most
"I didn't
overrated
leave,
general.
Reagan said, I didn't leave the party left me." I think that's what it is. But I'm just hoping, look, the things I believe in are still conservative. I believe in things like the rule of law. I remember when Republicans and conservatives thought it was wrong to rent out the Lincoln bedroom during the Bill Clinton administration. Now Republicans suddenly think it's okay for the president to line his own pockets, down in Florida with his own hotel.